Okay. We read about Parshas Korach. The event of Korach in the history of the Jewish people was the most serious moment. This is the first time somebody tried to usurp Moshe Rabbeinu. You know, very few people in the history of the Jewish people are called Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe is the teacher of the Jewish people. He was the one who had transmitted the Torah from God to the Jewish people. The word of Moshe, as the Rambam explains in the laws of Yesodei HaTorah, the words of Moshe are the words of God. He was designated openly to be God's spokesman. That besides what we heard at Sinai, that God had openly said, Moshe, tell them such and such. Once he was chosen in the presence of 600,000 Jews above the age of 20, men, and they prophesied at that time, and they heard it directly from Hashem, the Ten Commandments. From that time going forward, the word of Moshe is the word of Hashem. Therefore, Moshe is Rabbeinu. The first verse you teach a child when he begins speaking, based on the Gemara, and the Rambam rules this way in the laws of Talmud Torah, is Torah Tzivilon of Moshe Moroshak Yilas Yaakov. Torah Tzivilon, the Torah was commanded us by Moshe. It is the heritage of the congregation of Jacob. That's the first word. When the child begins speaking, those are the first words you teach him. The second verse you teach him is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. These are the two verses you teach a child when he begins speaking. Moshe is Rabbeinu. There's a Maral. The Maral explains, why is Torah called Torah? The Torah, the phrase or the word for Torah is chosen by God. Torah Tzivilon of Moshe. It doesn't say the laws were commanded us by Moshe. It says Torah. It doesn't say the wisdom of God was communicated us by Moshe. What is Torah? In Hebrew, lahoros means to guide, to direct. When we study Torah, Torah itself is the guidance. We must live our lives. It's not just abstract intellectuality. That's not what it is. It's just not wisdom. It's a way to live. It's Mora Derech. It guides us along the path of life, how to navigate every level of life. Because even the physical is directly integrated, intermingled with the spiritual. The Rambam rules in the laws of Deos that a Jew is able to live his life 24 hours a day, 70 years, that every moment of your life is a mitzvah. How do you do it? You sleep, you eat, you procreate, you vacation, you relax. Every nuance of your life could be a mitzvah. How? So he cites a verse, that if you live your life for the sake of God, why do I sleep? I sleep to be rested, that I should be able to have the energy to do the will of God. If that is your intent when you sleep, sleeping is a mitzvah. If you eat to be healthy, to maintain your health, to have the ability to function and do God's will, eating is a mitzvah. When you procreate, have children, and you have children to fill the mitzvah of procreation and to raise them, to be dedicated to the will of God. Although you love your children, you could vacation with them, you relax with them, but if the whole intent is to mentor your children to believe in what they're supposed to believe in, every moment of your investment in your family is a mitzvah. So a person can live every moment of his life as a mitzvah, although it's within the context of most mundane, because we're physical beings. Person has to sleep, person has to relax, person has relationships. The Gemara tells us in one location, very interesting. We know their colors. I remember the first time I went to the to the St. Louis Zoo. They have a bird pavilion, and they have over there birds from all over the world, the most exotic birds. You look at these birds, the plumage was so rich, green and yellow. The beaks, it looked like they were made of wax. They didn't look like real living creatures. The beauty is not to be believed. And I remember when I saw the Clydesdale horses, Anheuser-Busch's down there, they had these horses, the epitome of beauty. They're about 16 feet high. Power. The legs are like tree stumps. And the sheen of their coat, of their hide, beautiful. Why did God create such beautiful, this color schemes? You know why? So the Gemara tells us, if everything would be created just drab green, how would we function? Nothing would actually touch us to become excited about anything. The energy level, that we see colors, it actually ignites things within us, which creates excitement. And that motivates us. That gives us the energy to deal with many things. If everything we drab, they say that in Russia, because you have the winter, the Russian winter, it's mostly dark, even during the day. That's the reason why they're all alcoholics. They have to drink themselves into a stupor just to be able to survive time. Otherwise, you get depressed. You live a life where everything's drab. All you do, you experience depression. That's not what Hashem wants. He wants the person should be vibrant and energetic and ready to what? To take action. That's what it is. Every aspect, as I said, if you see the value of life, I'll give you an example. A person's going to close the biggest deal of his life, and he's going to close it in a restaurant. And he knows only he has to host that client in that restaurant to close the biggest deal of his life. It costs him a fortune. But you know something? Don't be penny wise and pound foolish. If it's the biggest deal of your life, give it all you have. Because if that's the way you have to host your client, you're going to close the biggest deal. If you understand the payout, what life is, I sleep. There used to be an advertisement, a certain mattress company. You should buy this very quality mattress because you're in bed a third of your life or a quarter of your life, whatever it is. That's why you should get it. Because if you get a good night's sleep, you could be actually fully functional the next day. Your mind should be clear. Your mind should be retentive and focused and eat healthy. The Rambam rules that a person has a Torah obligation to maintain his health because you cannot have a healthy mind unless you have a healthy body. Those are the words of Rambam. Why? Because if you're distracted with the ailments and pains and aches, it's a distraction from your focus. So therefore, to have the healthy mind, you have to have a healthy body. That's what it is. So everything, so if that is the focus of your intent, I eat, of course, kosher, but it's quality, it's tasty. But I'm only doing that to activate my feelings, to be satisfied, not to be distracted later, to be fully immersed and to enjoy it, to enjoy the dialogue, the interaction, the debate, whatever it is. It's fine. Nothing wrong with it. Otherwise, it's like pushing a boulder up a mountain. How long could you push a boulder up? If you see it, something which is, you get excited and it ignites you. It's like magnetism. It pulls you up the mountain. The boulder pulls you up the mountain. Korach. God gave us a prescription of life. It was communicated through Moshe Rabbeinu. As I said, Moshe Rabbeinu's word was the word of Hashem. The most serious moment was when Korach tried to undo that, to usurp that, and claim that whatever Moshe taught us was all nepotism. He created himself, and he pulled the wool over our eyes. That's what he attempted to do. And he was convinced. Why was he convinced? Korach, the Talmud, the Midrash tells us, there were, in the history of existence, the wealthiest Jew ever lived was Korach. There was never, who was a commoner. There was never a commoner who was wealthier than Korach. And among Gentiles, there was no wealthier commoner than Haman HaRasha. Haman, who was the viceroy of the Persian Empire. So firstly, he had one of a kind of wealth. In addition to that, he had a special pedigree. He was from the family of Moshe. He was a Levi. In addition, he was a very wise man. In addition, he had a phenomenal charisma. He had everything. He was gifted with unbelievable gifts. And a man, if you have that kinds of gifts, you realize you're walking a tightrope. Because if you recognize it's all from God, you're humbled and understand what you have to do with it. But otherwise, you believed you're God's gift to humanity. And if you stop believing in your own glory, then you get carried away. So this is the story. Moshe Rabbeinu had 4 uncles. Amram was the father of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. He was the eldest brother. According to the laws of Jewish inheritance, the firstborn receives a double portion of the inheritance. And all the other brothers, because they're not the firstborn, what we call the Bechor, they receive a single portion of the inheritance. Now, we're dividing up the so-called the family appointmentships. Moshe Rabbeinu, what is his status? He's the king. He's the king. He's the ultimate. And then who's second? Aaron. He's the high priest, which is fine. Korach had no problem with that. Why? Because as being the son of the Bechor, their father was the Bechor, he has a right to 2 appointmentships. Now, there were 3 other brothers. The next brother was Yitzhar. Yitzhar was the father of Korach. So he was supposed to, according to in his mind, he was supposed to get the 3rd appointmentship. Moshe Rabbeinu passed over him and chose a cousin of the youngest brother. So Korach had a problem with this. If the basis for the appointmentship is inheritance, I should have received the 3rd appointmentship. So why was it passed over? And if the appointmentship is based on qualification, I should be the high priest. So either way, it's a no-win situation over here. Therefore, Korach says, to me, it's confirmed, clear, all this is nepotism. Moshe Rabbeinu is pulling the wool over all our eyes. He's convincing us this is God, it's not God. But this is what? This is Moshe. Moshe created his own religion. I will do whatever I can to unseat him and to prove to the world that his word is not the word of God. Now, the appointment of Elitzophin ben Uziel, who is the cousin from the youngest brother, didn't happen right now. Happened before. So why all of a sudden is Korach now coming with this charge against Moshe Rabbeinu? So the Ramban, Nachmanides explained something interesting. Whenever we were confronted with the most serious moments in our history as a Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu always went to bat for us. Hashem says, I will destroy you. Moshe Rabbeinu intervenes. He evokes Hashem's mercy, Rachmim. We will not destroy him. The sin of the golden calf. He went back, brought a second set of tablets. We reinstated the Mishkan. Then there was a story with misowning him. They started complaining about meat. The quail, people died. He prayed again. We're forgiven. Then there was the story of the spies. All of a sudden, they have this idea, before they go into this promised land, they want to send scouts. Hashem says, no problem. Each tribe should send a representative, and they come back with disastrous reports. 10 of the 12 come back, say it's a land that devours its inhabitants. We're not going to survive. It's a death trap. God is out to destroy us. That was 10 of them. 2 of them, Kalev and Yoshua ben Nun, they came back with very positive reports. Two people could see the same thing. One sees it in the most extreme negative, and the other one says it's just the opposite. What you saw only is a confirmation that we will conquer and we will take over the land. We're not going to have any casualties. But unfortunately, the people bought into the 10, not into the 2. And they took on, they believed the 10. And they cried and they wailed. And they said, we want to go back to Egypt. God says, you know something, after all you've seen and all you've experienced, if you still question me, this generation doesn't deserve to go into the promised land. Therefore, for the next 40 years or 39 years, you people are going to wander. And only once this generation passes away, the new generation will go in. So only the people that were below 20 ultimately entered into the promised land. Now, after what we call the Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies, Moshe Rabbeinu did not supplicate God. He supplicated that they shouldn't be destroyed. But to annul the decree that the generations are going to wander and not go in, that he did not annul. Because it was a Chil Hashem. Accusing God of wanting to destroy them, that's a public desecration of God's name. It's unforgivable. So to destroy them at one moment, not, because that would be a Chil Hashem. That would be a desecration of God's name. Because what are the world going to say? That God doesn't have the ability to bring him in the land. So they will gradually, over a 40-year period, they're going to pass away. And by the end of the 40th year, the generation will be of the past. The new generation will go in. You understand? Could you imagine the level of disappointment was among the Jews? All these people who believed they were going in and beginning a new life with their families, they're not going in. They were condemned to die in the desert. There was a certain degree of disappointment in Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe, you're always there for us. And you're always able to work it out for us. He didn't work it out. The decree of dying over 40 years, that was fixed in stone. So Moshe, Korach read had the pulse of the Jewish people very, very, very well. Until that moment, if Korach would have dared question Moshe's authority, they would have lynched him or they would have stoned him. Moshe Rabbeinu is the hero. But now that Moshe Rabbeinu did not come through for the Jewish people, he says, now's the time. Now's the time to go for the jugular vein. Because he's not as popular as he was. Now I'm going to come with all my force to show nepotism, and Korach coming with a level of wealth, a level of pedigree, with his charisma and his actually glib mouth. He believes he could topple Moshe Rabbeinu. He could topple him. That's why he acted now, he didn't act earlier. Earlier, it would have fallen on deaf ears, and the Jewish people would have acted very, very extremely against him. But now he feels they're weak. Moshe is weak. Now he's able to actually topple him. Now let's understand something. How did Korach become so wealthy? So we read about when Yosef became viceroy of Egypt. How did he become viceroy of Egypt? Pharaoh had dreams, and he interpreted the dreams. He said there could be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. And he advised them how to store away all the grain so they should be able to survive the famine. During the years of famine, it was so extreme that all the wealth of Egypt went into the government coffers. All the wealth of the whole region of Canaan. The whole world was affected by this famine. All the wealth, the gold and silver, went into the coffers of the Egyptian government. And Yosef oversaw everything. And Yosef divided the wealth into three parts, and he hid it away. Before we left Egypt, Hashem had promised Avram Avinu they will be enslaved so many years, and they will be afflicted. Afterwards, they will go out with great wealth. We borrowed the personal effects of the Egyptians before we left Egypt, the gold, the silver, and the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us that every Jew No Jew left with less than 10 pack animals laden with gold and silver. That was the wealth that we took out of Egypt. Now, it's interesting. The law is that a kosher species, a sheep, a goat, an ox, a cow, the firstborn, just its birth, passing through the womb of its mother, sanctifies it. It's called a bechor. And it's naturally consecrated. It's brought as a sacrifice. Even the person doesn't consecrate it. But non-kosher species, even the firstborn has no sanctification. It's not consecrated, except the donkey. A donkey, the first issue of a donkey is naturally holy. And you have to redeem the donkey before you can benefit from it. The question is, why the donkey? Every other non-kosher species, when its firstborn passes through its womb, exits the womb, it's not naturally consecrated. But the donkey is. Why? Because what facilitated the promise, the fulfillment of the promise to Avram Avinu? They will go out with great wealth. They needed pack animals. What's the beast of burden? The beast of burden was the donkey. So because the beast of the donkey facilitated God's promise, therefore the donkey assumes that level of holiness that the first issue of the female donkey is naturally consecrated. So every Jew left Egypt with 10 pack animals laden with gold and silver. That's what's innately special about the donkey. It's a beast of burden. Korach, as he was leaving Egypt, all of a sudden, a cavernous area opened up, the ground opened up, and he came upon the location which Joseph had hidden away, a third of the wealth of the world. You know what this is? A third of the wealth. We're talking about, there's no number to describe the value of what he found. He left Egypt with over 350 donkeys, which just carried the keys to the vaults where he stored away this wealth after he found it. Could you imagine? Now, why was Korach worthy to come upon such wealth? It's unheard of. He's the wealthiest commoner who ever lived in the history of the world. Why? Korach had, God, when he sets things in motion, he understands the end of the story. He understood Korach ultimately is going to attempt to usurp the authority of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the question is going to be a question. Maybe this is nepotism. How do we put this question to rest forever? What was the end of the story of Korach and his community? The ground opened its mouth. Korach and his community was swallowed by the ground. And the third of the wealth which Korach had went into the oblivion forever. It was gone forever. The earth opened its mouth, closed, it was gone. Forever. So why did God give him that wealth? Because God wanted Korach to challenge Moshe Rabbeinu. Korach had pedigree, he had charisma, he had wisdom, he had everything. The only thing that he was missing was wealth, and with that wealth, he'll be able to launch this revolt against Moshe Rabbeinu. Without that, it would have fallen on deaf ears. So because he had all the pieces in place, and he was pompous, he's going to broach that question. And as much as Moshe Rabbeinu tried to respond, it fell on deaf ears. We find, the Mishnah tells us, Pirkei Avos, there were a number of things that were created Bein HaShmoshos during the twilight period, right before Shabbos began. One of the things were the mouth of the earth. Instead, if you take a look, all the things that were created there are essential to the destiny and eternity of Jewish people. For instance, the ram that was used at the time of the Akedah, that ram was created during the twilight period. Because, God forbid, if we wouldn't have had the Akedah, what silences prosecution every Rosh Hashanah on the Day of Judgment? That Avram was willing to slaughter his only son, his most special son, at the age of 37. And he did not withhold him. And as he was about to slaughter him, God says, withdraw your hand from your son. And he sees a ram caught in the thicket. And he brings the ram in the place of his son. That ram that was slaughtered is the equivalent of what? Of Yitzchak being slaughtered. because he would have, if God wouldn't have told him to withdraw. That the reason why we're able to survive the prosecution of Satan is because that merit silences him every Rosh Hashanah. If Korach wouldn't have been swallowed up by the mouth of the earth that was created during the twilight period, the question would always be hanging. Who said the Torah is divine? Maybe it's Moshe Rabbeinu. Maybe it was nepotism. Maybe it was fabricated by him. And he fooled us. Who knows? You never know. Therefore, God gives him all that wealth. And he allows him to broach this question. Ultimately, he's swallowed up. Him, his community, with all the wealth. They go into the oblivion. The Gemara tells over a story that there was one of the rabbis of the Talmud. He meets this Arab. This Arab was riding on a stallion, and he had a spear. He says to the rabbi, I want to show you something in the desert. So he takes him out to the desert, and he shows him there's a fissure in the ground, and there's smoke coming out of the ground. Yeah. And he takes a clump of fleece and puts it at the tip of the spear, and he puts it in the fissure, the crevice in the ground where the smoke's coming out, and the fleece becomes singed. Meaning it's so hot, it becomes burnt. And then he says to the rabbi, I'll put your ear to the ground. I hear something which I don't even know what I'm hearing. So the rabbi puts his ear to the ground and he hears, this is what he hears, chanting, Moshe emes v'toroso emes. A group of chanting, Moshe is truthful, his Torah is truthful, v'anachnu b'adoim. Korach and his community are burning in hell, spiritual hell, and they're chanting, Moshe is true, his Torah is true, and we are liars. That's what he's hearing. So it had to be, the lid had to be put on this question forever. Never again will it ever be questioned that maybe it was nepotism. Irrefutably, it's been concluded, the Torah is the word of Hashem. It's not Moshe Rabbeinu who fabricated something and tried to mislead you. So this moment is the most serious moment, because if you ever question the authenticity of Torah, there's no Judaism. Judaism is the word of God. The only religion which is not a man-made religion is Judaism. Every other religion, you had a group of people who witnessed this person walking on water, witnessed miracles, or this, whatever it is. Every Jew at Sinai, the millions of Jews who stood, openly prophesied and witnessed God communicating directly with Moshe that he is God's spokesman. So nobody was able to delude us and pull the wool over our eyes. But Korach somehow tried to undermine that. He failed. So forever, it's Moshe emes and Torah emes. And that's the reality. You know, it's interesting, you know, in the Gentile world, there were dark ages. Among Jews, there were never dark ages. Jews were never illiterate. Jews were always able to write. There was always the transmission in the worst times. There may have been maybe only a handful of people, but the core of the Jews always were able to retain and maintain that transmission from Sinai. And God promised us every day before we say Oleinu, the closing prayer towards the end of Shachris, we quote a verse. The Torah will never be removed from the mouths of your children, your children's children, and your children's children. Torah is guaranteed by God, will always be with the Jewish people. God says, I guarantee it, because unless you have that guarantee, there's no Judaism. There's the famous burning of the Torah scroll, the Talmud, in Paris. You know, there was the Notre Dame. There was a big fire in Notre Dame a few years ago. In the year, maybe 1150, we have the Ashkenazic Tosfos, Bali Tosfos. They were the grandchildren of Rashi, many of them, Rabbeinu Tam. And they were Ashkenazic earlier commentators. And it was an anti-Semitic government, and they took 13 wagon loads of Talmud. At one time, everything was a manuscript. You know what it takes to write the whole Talmud is entirely by hand, and it has to be written away where it's been proofread. Because if there's any mistake, one mistake becomes two mistakes, and eventually it becomes a different religion. They burned 13 wagon loads of manuscripts exactly where Notre Dame had the fire. That's exactly where they burned the 13 wagon loads of Talmud. Exactly the spot. You know, Hashem has a very good memory. As we say on Rosh Hashanah, there's no forgetting before the holy throne of God. It may take time. Exactly where you burnt my Talmud, that's exactly where Notre Dame is going up in smoke. And that's what happened. Rabbeinu Tam, his name was Rabbeinu Yaakov. He was the grandson of Rashi. He had a yeshiva in Paris. Of course, they knew the Talmud by heart, every one of his students. But each student of his expertise. It was one of the tractates. He had 60 students. Each student rewrote one of the tractates. That's how Torah was preserved and restored. Could you imagine if they wouldn't have had it committed to memory? What would have been? God forbid. When they burnt those scrolls, it would have been the end of Judaism. But because they had it committed to memory, they were able to rewrite everything, and they started all over again. But it was the original, authentic oral law was kept intact, and then from that they wrote other manuscripts. But it was the same thing. It was the most serious moment. Where do we go from here? This is before the printing press. That's exactly what Korach tried to do. Now the question is, Moshe Rabbeinu says, no problem. Tomorrow, we're going to prove who is chosen by God, who's not chosen by God. What are we going to do? We're going to take fire pans and put incense in the fire pans, and you're going to sacrifice it. Only one person is going to survive. We're talking about 250 to 1, 250 to 1, you have a chance of survival. And these people were the leading Torah sages of the Jewish people. And they were convinced by Korach that Moshe is a charlatan. He's misleading them. And they're willing to take the challenge. Now, who in his right mind? We have a 250 to 1 odds that you're going to lose. Because there's only one high priest. Korach believed he would survive. How is he so convinced? But all of them perished. They were burnt. But who in his right mind will take such a chance? And Korach, being so wise, he's able to delude the other ones, to wine and dine them with his charisma, with his wealth, everything else. Like it says, bribery could blind the wisest and even the righteous. But he himself is the briber. How could he be so foolish? So the Midrash tells us, Eino hitoso, his eye misled him. God gave a little piece of information. He had seen that one of his descendants was going to be Samuel the prophet, Shmuel HaNovi. Samuel the prophet was the descendant of Korach, and his greatness and spirituality in his time was the equivalent of Moshe and Aaron combined. So he said, how's it possible? If I'm going to perish in this test of fire, how's it possible there should be a Shmuel in the future, Samuel the prophet? Evidently, clearly, I'm going to survive. But he made a mistake. You know what the mistake he made? He didn't realize 2 of his sons at the last moment backed out on him. And they did tshuva. They repented. And that Shmuel HaNavi is a descendant of one of his sons. But initially, he believed there's no way that his children are going to turn their back on him. Or you want to use a more earthy word, they're going to stab him in the back. But it's very interesting. You know, a person can come about tshuva. It's not simple. It's nearly impossible. Impossible. You need a special divine intervention to become a Baal Tshuva. You have to have special merit. The 2 sons of Korach, at the last moment, they did tshuva. Why did they do tshuva? As I said, it's nearly impossible. It's like It's more, it's easier to move a mountain than do tshuva. So the Midrash tells us, Moshe Rabbeinu was the most forgiving person. Korach, although he tried to usurp his authority, so he didn't want them to perish, he and his community. If somehow we could reason with him, talk some sense into him, and he changed his position, he'd be more than happy. So he goes into the tent of Korach, and Korach has two sons, one to the right of him, one to the left of him, sitting there. Moshe enters into the tent, and he wants to speak to Korach. Korach turns his face away from Moshe. Doesn't want to enter into a dialogue with him. What does he say? Very interesting. He says to himself, Moshe is smarter than I am. If I allow myself to enter into a dialogue, he will convince me that I'm wrong. I don't want to be convinced that I'm wrong. Therefore, I'm not even allowed the discussion even to begin. You hear this? Because he's going to delude me and convince me that his position is the correct position. So the moment Moshe wanted to speak to him, he turned his face away from Moshe. But his two sons had a dilemma. What should they do? Should they just stand and honor Moshe and acknowledge him as being the teacher of Klal Yisrael, of the Jewish people, or out of respect for their father, they will sit. They will not acknowledge Moshe. You know what they chose to do? They stood. To the disappointment of their father, they stood. They stood up to acknowledge Moshe Rabbeinu. So the Midrash says, because they stood up to acknowledge Moshe Rabbeinu, Hashem allowed them to have stirrings of tshuva in their heart. So the reason why they merited to have the stirrings of tshuva was they gave honor to Moshe Rabbeinu despite their father's dislike to this. The slight disgracing their father. So why was there Shmuel HaNavi? Why was there Samuel the prophet? Because his two sons had the stirrings of tshuva, which came about that despite their father, they stood up and acknowledged Moshe Rabbeinu. That's why there was a Shmuel HaNavi. There was a Samuel the prophet. But Korach didn't realize that his sons are going to back out on him. He believed in his position, he's going to survive. Therefore, he's not taking a chance. He knows he's the sole survivor. Little did he know that he's not surviving this. It's only because his sons, the last moment, they did tshuva, they repented, and they extricated himself from the whole story over here. To show you how people get caught up, we speak about Korach had three cohorts. He had Dosan Aviram, who were the detractors of Moshe Rabbeinu from day one. They initially informed on him, and throughout this whole period of time, whenever they could somehow try to undermine Moshe's authority, they did. And finally, they went down with Korah into the ground. And there was another person who was a cousin. His name was On ben Peles. On ben Peles, he was the third cohort. He was also from the tribe of Reuven. And he had a wife who was a very special woman. And King Solomon says in Mishlei, Chochmas noshim bonsa beisa. The wisdom of women build the home. And the evil of a woman could destroy the home. Whose wisdom saved the home? That's the wife of On ben Peles, the wife of this third cohort. What happened? His wife sits down to him and says, I want to explain to you what kind of fool you are. You're a fool. He says, why am I a fool? What seems to be what Korach saying is correct. He says, let me ask you a question. Let's say Korach wins this battle. Who are you going to be? As today you're a nobody, tomorrow you're a nobody. You're the same nobody. What are you getting involved with? You have nothing to gain by it. Why don't you stay out of it, not get involved? So he says, what am I supposed to do? I'm already caught up in it. They're coming to get me. They're coming down the street, and they're going to enlist me, and they want me to come with them because I've been involved with them. So I'll take care of it. So she gave him some wine to drink. He says, go take a nap. I'll take care of that. She went and stood at the entrance of a tent. She uncovered her hair. Korach was a very religious man. He wouldn't look at a woman if her hair was uncovered. And the moment they're coming down the street to get On ben Peles, her husband, to join the group, they see a woman with her hair uncovered. The moment they see that, they run the opposite direction. So she saved the husband. And what she said to him is so correct. What are you getting involved? This is not your fight. Because even if Korach wins or loses, you're the same nobody. You're the same zero. What are you getting involved? But people, they get caught up in the frenzy. It's principle. People, they live and die for principle. And after live and die for principle, there's not even a memory, a trace of that person's existence. What did you accomplish? Nothing. Is that the value of your life? And that's what she said to him. But Korach, because of his charisma and his wealth and his power and his pedigree, he was able somehow to bring them in where he didn't give them a moment to think rationally. What do you have to gain by all this? You have nothing to gain. Well, he misled us. We have an axe to grind. But after you grind your axe, where are you at? You're nowhere. And ultimately, because they didn't realize they didn't have the wife to give them that direction, they all perished. And they all went down into the ground. But what's the evil is Beso? The evil of his wife. He comes back. We read earlier that the Levites, the Levium, they took the place of the firstborn. They had to be initiated. What did they do? They had to shave all their hair. Because this was an atonement for the sin of the Egel. It was idolatry. Like a Metzorah, like a leper, has to shave all the hair off his body. And after they shaved the hair, that means the beard, the eyebrows, everything, they wave them like you wave a korban, a sacrifice. They will wave. Moshe, Aaron would wave them. He comes home. This man is the wealthiest Jew with charisma. He had a presence. He walks through the entrance of his tent. His wife doesn't recognize him. He left with a beard, with eyebrows. He comes back. It looks like he just walked out of a concentration camp. Totally shaved. Not a hair on his body. She says, "Who are you?" He says, I'm Korach. So she says, "What did they do to you?" And she tells him. She says, "Don't you realize they treat it like an animal? You wave an animal, you share an animal. Don't you realize you're a heap of dung?" This is what his wife tells him. "You're like a heap of dung." When he hears this, she injected him with that poison, that venom. Now he's out to destroy Moshe Rabbeinu. He didn't realize what kind of fool he was. Here I'm the most prestigious person, wealth, pedigree, wisdom, and they turn me into an animal. I didn't realize I'm being treated like an animal. His wife really put the knife in and turned it in his back. He was livid against Moshe Rabbeinu, but she's the one who activated him. She set him off. So the wisdom of the wife could either build the house and secure the house or destroy it. He had an evil wife. She was an evil woman. But nevertheless, he didn't have to buy into it. He bought into it. But what was the value of all this? To set forever Moshe Emes for Torah Emes. That never should the authenticity of the Torah be questioned. Is it the word of Moshe or is it the word of God? To that degree. He goes to reason with Dasna Aviram. There's a question which is asked. It says that 80% of the Jewish people perished during the days of darkness. Only 20% left Egypt. Dasna Aviram left Egypt. These guys were bad people. They informed the Moshe when he killed the Egyptian, and they tried to usurp his authority continuously. They're real troublemakers. I mean, why did God allow them to leave Egypt? If 80% perished in Egypt during days of darkness, they should have also perished. Why did they die? Now, who died during days of darkness? Only the Jews who didn't want to leave Egypt. If you want to leave Egypt, you got your visa. You got the exit visa. You wanted to stay, we leave no Jews behind. Dasna Aviram wanted to leave. Why did they want to leave so badly? The reason why they want to leave so badly now, originally, why were they able to inform Moshe Rabbeinu when he killed the Egyptian? Because even among the slave class, there were very wealthy Jews. And because of the degree of wealth, they had relationships in the upper echelons of the Egyptian government. That's how they were able to inform Moshe Rabbeinu. God caused them to have financial reversals. So when Moshe came back, they were impoverished. And as a result of that, They couldn't go to the government and make trouble with the government. He clipped their wings. Financially, they were ordinary people, maybe less than ordinary. Now, who's Dasan Biram? They're the elite of the tribe of Reuven. From the tribe of Reuven is the firstborn, and they are the elite. So what do they need to get back into the saddle? To be able to flex their muscles. When they leave Egypt, they're leaving with tremendous wealth. They're waiting for that moment they could get back to the promised land and they're back in a position of leadership and power and dictate. That's what they're waiting for. They were going to leave Egypt because they're vying and dying for that glory and that power, which they believed is going to be restored, and they would have been restored. If not for the Chet HaMeraglim, if not for the sin of the spies, if they would have been restored. But what happened? What happened with the spies? Moshe says, you know something? It's over. You people are not going in. Could you imagine? These people who are living for the sake of glory and power, all of a sudden, you pulled the plug on them. They went mad. They went berserk. They said, Moshe Rabbeinu, you're trying to convince us that you have value or anything has value. If you gouge your eyes out, we're not coming even to look at you. Even if you gouge your eyes out. They were having a full meltdown over here. Here they were waiting for this moment to regain their power and glory and exercise their arrogance and power. And all of a sudden now, everything's taken from them. You know, you can't eat gold. What do you do with gold in the desert? You're going to wander for 40 years. You're not going into that land. You're not going to see the glory. They were so distraught. They said, on no circumstances, Moshe Rabbeinu, you're not going to fool us. Never. They hated, despised Moshe Rabbeinu to his core. That was the intensity of hate they had towards Moshe Rabbeinu. And it says when they went out, as Goliath went out and he blasphemed God, that's the way he blasphemed Moshe Rabbeinu, these two characters, Dasan Aviram. Because all they lived was for glory. And now when the lights went out and the neon lights went out, there's no longer glory. It was worse than death. Therefore, that was the reaction. But this is the story of Korach and Dasan Aviram, why ultimately God had to create the mouth of the earth to swallow them up, because this relates to the destiny of the Jewish people, the eternity of the Jewish people, which is based upon the authenticity of the divine word, which is the Torah itself. Okay. Stop here. I'm